Here it goes.
There we go. There we go. Recording in progress.
Do that. I don't know what to do this time.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So sitting back, Joseph Goldstein likes to say, settle back. It's a nice phrase to kind of point at the attitude and sort of energy that we bring to our practice to settle. And you can close your eyes or just lower your gaze. Or bringing the attention inward. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. In, out. I breathe in deep. I breathe out calm. Deep, calm. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing out, release. Smile, release. Breathing in, I know this present moment. Breathing out, I know that this is a wonderful moment, the only moment, present moment, wonderful moment. Breathing in, I feel my whole body. Breathing out, I feel my whole body. Breathing in, I calm the body. Breathing out, I calm the body. Breathing in, I feel joy. Breathing out, I feel joy. Breathing in, I experience happiness. Breathing out, I experience happiness. Breathing in, I'm aware of mental activity. Breathing out, I'm aware of mental activity. Breathing in, I calm mental activity. Breathing out, I calm mental activity. Breathing in, I'm aware that this body and mind are impermanent. Breathing out, I'm aware that this body and mind are impermanent. So Olive chimes in right on cue. So I hope everyone is well tonight. This January night, these long nights of the Northern Hemisphere winter. So what to say about Thich Nhat Hanh? I'll talk a little bit about, I'm sure some of you know of some of his biography, but I do want to talk a little bit about his life as well as his practice. And if it was not evident, I was using a approach to meditation in the guided meditation, which I learned through him, not directly from him, but I'll tell you about how I encountered him myself as well. So, it's interesting. I mean, I've known about him and his life for a long time, but I did read more today and kind of fill in some of the details. I think when he really kind of becomes this figure in the West is when he was in the U.S. and met Martin Luther King Jr. and King famously nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1967, which was not awarded, and nobody was awarded the Peace Prize that year, which is probably appropriate given what was going on in the world. But he had this huge impact on King, I think, because he helped King to connect the civil rights movement with larger issues and bringing other issues to bear that carried the same moral weight. And so it was Thai is the name that people call Thich Nhat Hanh. It was Thai who convinced the King to speak out against the Vietnam War, which King hesitated to do initially because he was afraid of kind of splitting the civil rights movement and kind of creating some kind of a schism or diluting it in some way, or feeling that, afraid that people would think he was getting distracted perhaps. But eventually he came to realize that he couldn't separate the morality and the immorality of racism from the immorality of war and the immorality of economic exploitation, as we see in the speeches from his last couple of years alive. And so that I think it's quite striking since in our country, King is seen as kind of a modern day saint, and to see that he was deeply moved and influenced by Thich Nhat Hanh really speaks to Thich Nhat Hanh's power in the spiritual sense. But Thai was at that point becoming an enemy of the Vietnam, I think essentially North and South, because they didn't want to hear his message of reconciliation and peace. And the U.S. was not really pleased with them either. So he wound up being exiled to France, where he eventually built his famous Plum Village monastery. I first started doing Buddhist practice in 1980 and became aware of him in those first couple of years just through his writings. And then a teacher who was a friend and actually I lived with at one point, he and his wife went to Plum Village in the early to mid 80s and came back. And that's when I learned the practice of the gathas that some of you have done with me on retreats, and similar to what I was offering tonight. And it's such a simple practice that Thich Nhat Hanh offered. It has this kind of purity to it that kind of cuts through a lot of effort in a way. It just gives you something very clean to work with. So first of all, to say that then there are these parallel aspects of him as a leader. One is that he really was essentially the founder of engaged Buddhism, the idea of bringing Buddhist concepts into social and even political realms without sort of making that partisan, but by bringing the morality of Buddhism to bear on issues of war and poverty, racism, all of that, which we see how incredibly influential that is in modern Buddhism, which in the early Western version of Buddhism, there was little, if any, of that kind of focus. It was very much, we're going to meditate and kind of be separate from everything. And Thich Nhat Hanh really brought forth this idea of living and engaging in Buddhism. And indeed, my book, Living Kindness, is very much, that title is very much influenced by Thich Nhat Hanh, and the idea of not limiting our practice to just the cushion. And so what's striking, I think it's interesting to talk about him as a meditation teacher, because first of all, his background, his training is technically Zen. If you see him, he's always referred to as a Zen monk. But I think that because of the geographics of Vietnam, which is close to the Theravadan world, as well as Thich Nhat Hanh's own tendencies of ecumenicism, he very much blended Theravadan Buddhism with Mahayana Buddhism. So Mahayana Buddhism is sometimes called the Northern tradition, and it's a later sort of outgrowth of the Buddhist tradition. So the Buddhist tradition starts in India and spreads to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, Burma, Thailand, and kind of becomes established there as Theravadan Buddhism. Then it also then moves up through Afghanistan, and literally this is like the trading routes, right? The Silk Road, up through Afghanistan and then Western China into China, and eventually, and this becomes the Northern school, which is Mahayana Buddhism. And so you guys who've been with me for a while know that when I talk about the suttas, those are Theravadan. And then when you hear the word sutra, as opposed to sutta, the sutra is Sanskrit for the same word sutta, but it's the Mahayana, so things like the Heart Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, and these are all things that come later. They're not from the Buddha. They're Buddhist, but they're not from the Buddha. They're teachings that evolved, and most of them, we don't know who originated most of those sutras, but they start to go off in sort of different directions, and without getting into a lot of the technical detail of that. But it's interesting, Thich Nhat Hanh was concerned that Northern and Mahayana Buddhism had lost touch with these primary texts, particularly the Satipatthana, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, and the Anapanasati, the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. And so a lot of his work was to kind of bridge those and to bring the mindfulness teachings, which are somewhat, or he felt were somewhat belittled in Northern Buddhism, as kind of not advanced enough, like they were more interested in other kinds of practices. And it was part of his journey was to bring them back into Mahayana Buddhism. So you actually see this now when you go to a Zen center or Chan Buddhist centers, you see that they actually now incorporate these Theravadan teachings much more than I think they were doing 50 years ago. I can't completely validate that, but that's my impression from visiting such places and seeing, oh, there's these, this stuff is from, Thailand, this is from Burma. But the other thing that I'll say that really appealed to me about Thich Nhat Hanh was, I was originally, when I started to do insight meditation, as we call it, Vipassana, it was coming through this pretty rigid Burmese model. And it had some of the softer, I would call it, say, softer Thai model, but it still was, it felt a little alien, and it pushed certain buttons for me, frankly, that it felt like there was sort of this standard that I was trying to live up to that was very hard to live up to. And Thich Nhat Hanh's practice was just the opposite of that. It was so welcoming, and it made me feel like, oh, this is enough. It was very much that this is enough. You don't, just breathing in, I know that I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I am breathing out. Breathing in, I breathe in deep. I breathe out slow. I breathe in calm. I breathe out ease. Just gentle, simple words. And that, as I practiced through the 80s, and I got sober in 1985, so there was a lot of changes in my life going on, and it was hard for me to stay focused on meditation when so much was happening. Having Thich Nhat Hanh's practices really helped me to stay in touch with my practice, and to feel that it was enough. That I didn't have to, follow the progressive insight or the jhanas or some kind of sort of complicated practice. I could just, this was enough. I found that really, really inspiring and just so helpful. And I realized, and I was thinking about him today, realized how much that and a couple other things I'm going to talk about influenced my practice and continue to influence, and that I sort of don't acknowledge it very much, because it's been a lot of years of practice and a lot of different things that I do and study, but that kind of foundation of it, that's part of the kind of key foundation for me, is that gentleness and welcoming of Thich Nhat Hanh. Because he's a remarkable person, because if you ever saw him speak, and I was fortunate to see him a couple times, he was so soft and gentle that you could feel like, oh, he's going to like float away, But on the other hand, he was so grounded and so courageous, such a strong heart. This was someone who, during the Vietnam War, would go into villages that had been attacked and help them to rebuild and help the villagers, and not afraid to be right in the middle of this devastating war as it was starting to expand in the early 60s. So incredibly courageous and humble, and has that same kind of spirit that the Dalai Lama has of being just a humble Buddhist monk. And it's interesting. I have, some of you might have heard me talking about that. I'm kind of doing a lot of reading about the Anapanasati Sutta, the Sutta on mindfulness of breathing. And one of the books that I've been reading is Thich Nhat Hanh's Breathe, You Are Alive, which is his book on the Anapanasati Sutta. But I'm reading that along with Venerable Analayo, who's a Theravada scholar, and Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, who was a Thai forest master. And it really struck me today how, even when there are slight variations of how this is interpreted, that there's this quality that comes from these masters that's shared, a sense of just a knowing. I don't know how else to put it. Just this wisdom that is so powerful and so. I mean, it's really supportive. It's like, oh, okay, yes. They're not preachers, and they're not people that are trying to convince you of something or convert you to something. They're just talking about the truth, and they're just talking about life, and talking about mindfulness, and talking about breathing, and being in a body, and having feeling, and having a mind, and all of that. And just to see this shared wisdom. There's a beautiful piece in his, like in an appendix, in that the appendix of that book that talks about him wanting to bring the Anapanasati Sutta and the Satipatthana Sutta more into the Mahayana. And it's just, you see this really actually scholarly side of him that was barely seen in his more, famous writings and his appearances, where he seemed, sometimes you would think, well, he's just saying breathe in, breathe out. Isn't there more? But reading this and seeing, oh yeah, there was a lot more. Like, it's this still waters run deep is definitely the image for Thich Nhat Hanh. So the first time I saw him speak was in Los Angeles. And it was not long after the Rodney King video showing him, Rodney King, being beaten by a group of LAPD police officers. I believe they were LAPD. The county and city there get mixed up a little bit. But as we all know, all those of us who lived through that, it was really the first time that we had seen this, something that's now become almost a regular sight now that we have phones that can make a film. But a neighbor looking out the window with his video cam shot this video of this guy being beaten. And of course, it was a scandal and a horror. And of course, one of the great scandals is that the policemen were not convicted of, the crimes that they obviously committed. In any case, Thich Nhat Hanh, speaking to this big auditorium in West LA, said, I was in France when they started to play this video, and it played over and over, and we all saw it. And as I watched it, of course, I felt tremendous sorrow and compassion for this Black man who's being beaten mercilessly by these policemen. But I also felt compassion for the policemen who were so poisoned with rage and anger and racism that they could dehumanize this person, that they live with that hatred within themselves, because I know that hatred is painful and that they are suffering as well. And that piece of that talk, I mean, that's the only thing I remember him saying that night, but it stayed with me for 30 years. And it's something I've repeated many times and brought into my own teachings and brought into my own life and brought into my own reflections about many, many other events, all kinds of events, not just those kinds of horrific ones. Because it's such a courageous thing, and it's courageous partly because it's something a lot of people don't want to hear. I mean, I guess that's really why it's courageous to me. People don't want to hear that, and it takes a lot of courage to speak that truth and to acknowledge that. And it's not to condone or to say that someone isn't responsible, but simply to acknowledge where that's coming from. Because when we don't see where cruelty is coming from, then there's no real chance of healing it. Then all we are doing is pushing against it. All we are doing is creating more aversion to it. This is what the foundational principle of personally bringing compassion in such a situation. Because if we don't bring compassion, then we too become poisoned with that anger, with that rage, with the rage towards them. And of course, we're not all Thich Nhat Hanh. So, and I imagine that he too had his moments of anger, but it's clear that he was so committed to compassion that he wasn't going to allow that to take hold within him, to get a control or get a grip on his own heart. So these are three areas we can speak to where I think he transformed modern Buddhism with engaged Buddhism, which essentially didn't exist before him and is now a huge part of contemporary Buddhism, with the mindfulness teachings that he offered, the description Jack Kornfield gives of Thich Nhat Hanh walking on the land at Spirit Rock, and that just when he's walking up the road, there's just a sense of awe in the people looking at him, because just in the way that he walks, you can feel that each step is touching the ground, is with mindfulness and with the connection, with love. And then his deep compassion. And the last thing I'll do today is read his incredible poem, Call Me by My True Names. But so there was something else that came up as I was talking about that. Oh, something else that a fourth thing that for me has been hugely influential, and it connects with all of this, because it's real. This is in a way the connection between engaged Buddhism, mindfulness, and compassion, and that is the way that he talks about eating, and the way that he takes mindful eating into this universal practice, where he asks us to look at our food and then reflect on the sky and the clouds and the rain and the earth and the farm worker who picked the raisins or the fruit, and the trucker who carried it, and the packer, and the people in the grocery store who unloaded it, and the checker at the check, and connecting it all, the earth, all the way to the check stand, that this is all connected. And he has this beautiful word, interbeing, which I was reading today, his definition of interbeing. So it looks like that's the one book I didn't bring over here. Is it? Oh, no, there it is. My collection of Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't even really have a lot of his books, only 5. Oh, yeah. And I should also mention Ecumenicism, his wonderful book, Living Buddha, Living Christ, which helped me a lot when I was writing Burning Desire, and trying to connect the idea of Dharma God. But let me see if I can find his definition of interbeing. I don't think I can, because I didn't mark it. And what happens when you don't mark it? In any case, interbeing is this recognition that everything is connected, that that there is no separation, that our bodies are made out of the earth and out of the air, that we kind of try to separate ourselves and create these artificial boundaries, but ultimately everything is interbeing. And out of that, of course, arises the compassion, and arises the care for each other. We know that in order to commit violence, we have to shut down in some way. We can't feel our connection to others, and indeed, committing violence or being forced to commit violence as a soldier, does things to people that can. I don't want to say it destroys them necessarily, but it can destroy them inside. And so in order to be alive, to be fully alive, we must be aware that we are all connected. There is no real separation. One of the ways we experience this is just in breathing, which of course is where he would bring us back to. When we breathe, we're taking the world into our bodies. That air that you're breathing, it was out there. It was separate from you a moment ago. And then it's coming into your body, and it's part of you for a moment, and then it's gone. And we see that this idea of me and you, or air and body, these are all just artificial constructs. It's all interconnected. We are living in a remarkable flowering of Buddhism. And to think that this humble monk from thousands of miles away could have influenced our lives is a great gift of our modern world, as many problems as there are with our modern world. And to have his teachings for us all is such an incredible thing. And as I say, it was so striking for me today, because I knew he'd been sick, and I knew I wasn't surprised to hear that he had died, and so I didn't feel a great heartbreak that he died. It seemed like it's a natural thing to have happen. And I don't think he was concerned about dying. And we couldn't ask him to have given us any more than he did give us, because he gave us so much. But yeah, for me, going back and reflecting for a couple hours this afternoon and looking at some of his work and reading about him as well as reading his work, it really it surprised me. I had not acknowledged and realized how important he'd been in my life. So this poem says, this poem was written in 1978 during the time of helping the boat people. So, as you know, people trying to escape from the communist regime in Vietnam that had taken over after the US left. Many of them tried to escape on boats, and some terrible things happened. Please call me by my true names. Don't say that I will depart tomorrow. Even today, I am still arriving. Look deeply. Every second I am arriving to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with still fragile wings, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that is alive. I am a mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river. And I am the bird that swoops down to swallow the mayfly. I am a frog swimming happily in a clear water of a pond. And I am the grass snake that silently feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands. And I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names so I can wake up and the door of my heart could be left open, the door of compassion. So nothing has been lost. We are also fortunate that we live in a time of the printing press and the internet, and all the teachings are still with us, still available to us. If we want to honor Thich Nhat Hanh or any of our teachers, the best thing we can do is continue this practice, carry on these teachings in our own hearts for the benefit of all beings. So, thank you all for being here tonight. It's an unusual night when I'm not inviting anyone to speak. So, I hope everybody is okay, and I will be hopefully seeing you again on Tuesday. And maybe spend some time with Thich Nhat Hanh this weekend. If you don't have any of his books, I imagine most of you do. If you haven't seen one, you can probably find it. But read about him and reflect and practice mindfulness and compassion. Thanks, you guys. Good night.